Welcome to With All Due Respect, where we discuss big issues with grace and respect. I'm Megan Powell Dutoit.
And I'm Michael Jensen, and welcome to our, would you believe, 11th season overall, and it's our first season with Hope Media. So we're coming to you from the studios of Hope Media, and very glad to be here.
We're starting with an issue that has not only been getting a lot of airtime in Australia, but has overflowed onto our streets with protests and counter-protests. Michael's even had an article on the matter published on ABC Online. The topic is immigration, and Michael and I are going to discuss whether Australia has an immigration problem and what a Christian response should be before talking with Jerry Jones-Sparks, an immigrant who has a ministry to, for and with immigrants. And we then finish with a TV series which looks at the history of Australia as written in our DNA.
For argument's sake, where we take a debate, cut out the party politics and try to talk it out. Now, on the 31st of August 2025 and then on the 19th of October 2025, nationwide protests against mass immigration were held, called March for Australia. These mirrored marches being held across the world, especially in Europe, against immigration. The August march drew upwards of 50,000 people across the country. And the organisation of these protests was controversial, with some news outlets finding ties to neo-Nazi and white nationalist groups. Facts were disputed, with very different numbers being bandied about. It's hard to get at the real story, isn't it?
Well, we'll try.
Yeah. Some were worried about how many immigrants Australia could bear to take in at the moment, with the cost of living crisis, while others pointed to how some of the rhetoric being used against immigration was racist. Amid all of that, some were concerned about retaining what they saw as a Christian identity of Australia, given that immigrants are coming in from other religions, particularly Islam and Hinduism, the fastest growing religion in Australia. So what do you reckon, Megan? Is Australia taking in too many immigrants?
Well, one of the problems was that the stats, I think they came out about 2 weeks before the first march in August, were really misunderstood, whether deliberately or not deliberately. In that people were not understanding, for instance, that migrant arrivals is not the same as long-term migrants.
Right. So you've got students, for instance, overseas students, on quite a lot of those included in the stat.
They would be included because they're planning to stay for, I think it's something you have to be resident for 12 months out of the 16 months or so on. So that's one of the problems, is that arrivals could be just people coming in and stating what their intentions are, which may or may not end up with a permanent residence, right?
Yeah.
And the other problem too is because arrivals don't track, they're like a sort of interim measure. They don't track in and of themselves whether someone comes in and goes out, comes in and goes out, comes in and goes out. So every time that person came in, they get counted.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So they're getting it. So they're racking up the scores.
Yeah. So in reality, what's happened is I think in the last year, 2023 to 24, which they put the figures out for, net overseas migration was 446,000, which is actually down from 536,000 a year earlier. And overall, and we'll put some links in the show notes, what seems to have occurred is that there was a huge drop in migration due to COVID, understandably. People weren't coming in or out. And then there's been catch-up, obviously, as happens with anything like that. So it has gone up as we've come past the primary part of COVID. And then that catch-up as of like December last year started to fade off again. So we're going back to what's normal.
So you're saying that the recorded number is actually, or the kind of stated number is less than people imagine, or the kind of net number that's been bandied around. But isn't the impression people have really governed by, not by some number in the hundreds of thousands, because we just can't imagine that, but by what they experience in their suburb or in their schools? I mean, is that really the issue, where there's concentrations of immigration that are affecting, or that people feel affected by? Do you think
there's a couple of things going on there, I think. One is, yes, people think about what's happening in their immediate context, and also people's perceptions aren't necessarily very good. People aren't actually very good at estimating numbers or proportions or so on. People aren't actually notably very good at determining numbers, at looking at proportions. It all comes through filters of bias and so on. So, for instance, people always perceive that women are speaking more than they are in any particular situation because we're more used to male voices or that kind of thing. So if you're used to a certain composition in your suburb, people coming in and changing that, it's going to look larger than it in fact is anyway. And obviously then people in different suburbs have different experiences. So there's that. And I also think that we can't underestimate what happens when political people are using it for political gain, right? So there is something to be gained by ramping up fears about immigration, obviously.
Okay. I mean, but I imagine a person who was concerned about immigration might feel that's quite a cynical reading. I mean, I don't necessarily not accept that. I guess... But
I just gave an example, like with the stats, where that was obviously
that's
happening.
Right.
So
yes.
if people see that, then they think, oh, the situation's really bad.
Worse, yeah, it's
but
worse.
Also, I think even when you get numbers without context, the way that the person frames that numbers is going to affect how you receive them.
I totally agree with that. But I guess it is worth saying that this is a matter of practical public policy, that everybody in the debate should be in favour of, like almost nobody would be against immigration at all. There needs to be some level of immigration on the one hand, and there needs to be some limit to immigration on the other. There is, I would imagine, everybody would recognise that there could be a situation where there is too much and where immigration might be theoretically detrimental to those living in Australia. So it is about, so it is about choosing a number or coming up with measures of how much and how little, rather than no immigration or open immigration. It's the vexed question of in between, isn't it?
Well, and apart from that also, it's even more complex than that, I suppose, in the sense of...
We always like to make things more complex with all due respect.
So I was reading an article in The Age by Professor Alan Gamlin, who's at the ANU's Migration Hub. And his point is, for instance, one of the things that's happening at the moment is a housing supply issue, which it makes sense that people go, oh, migrants come in, there's less housing, right?
Yeah.
However, the problem started back earlier. The housing supply started back earlier as a problem. And in fact, the being unaffordable started during COVID. So it wasn't the rise of immigrants that caused the problem. But to solve the housing supply problem, one of the things we need is skilled immigrants in the building trades
to
in order to provide
houses.
The workforce to build the houses. So there's all those kind of considerations, which if you're not expert in the context, for instance, we need overseas students to make our university system viable and all that kind of stuff. So, but people are most of us don't have that larger picture, right?
No, that's true. I think also the concern would come from the cultural side, as in some people would be arguing, look, the rise in Islamic immigration has doubled. So they've gone from 1.5% of the population in 2005-06, not exact figures, to 3.7 or something like that. And then Hinduism has grown even faster. And so what we have then is concentrations of people of cultural backgrounds. And then the argument would be further that those cultures are actually shifting Australian culture in ways that are undesirable. So that would be the argument in return, that there's a concentration of particular cultural and political backgrounds that's leading to the detriment of our Australian culture, our Australian way of life, that we haven't got a great way of integrating people into our Australian way of life.
The really interesting thing, so what do people mean by Australian way of culture? What do they think about different religions? There's a lot there, right? One thing I think to note is that Australia will be a lot less, and I think you've noted this as well in the past, it will be a lot less Christian without immigration, because the rise of no religion has been from within Anglo-Australia.
No, absolutely, yeah.
And a lot of the immigrants, like for instance,
Europeans, you're going to get secularists, yes.
Yeah. I know from my Baptist perspective that a lot of the new churches that are joining our denomination and the new pastors that we're bringing in, and I sit on the committee where we get new pastors and we put them through the process, are immigrants. So, yeah, there's kind of an idea of this equation of Anglo or white culture with Christianity, which really doesn't, if you actually do care about Jesus rather than Christian as some kind of cultural concept. And I kind of like Jesus.
Jesus.
But then immigration isn't necessarily making us less Christian. Now, of course, that doesn't take into account that the fastest rising, coming off low bases, are Hinduism and Islam. Actually, it's not either of those, to be honest. It's a really small minority religion called something like Yahadi or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But they're kind of like
They're coming
less
off
than
such a
100,000.
low base
Yeah,
that
that's
it's
right.
like exploding, but it's only like 300 people. Yeah. So taking that aside, but then we need to think about, well, is what we want, and perhaps I'm thinking here particularly as a Christian rather than just, say, an Australian per se, is what I want that people from other religions can't come in? Or is it actually good that they come in because, then we can actually talk to them about Jesus?
Yeah. Well, this is the vexed question. So interestingly, I saw a clip with Charlie Kirk, of all people, arguing with a white nationalist, saying he'd rather a bunch of Nigerians come in that were Christian to America because he believed America was and I think he's got a stronger argument that America has a kind of Christian heritage than perhaps we do in
Australia,
an identity.
yeah.
But he was definitely not. It's not race, it's faith. But the argument that's put is really that Islamicism in particular is antithetical to Western liberalism, and that there won't be proper integration or acceptance of. So we can put that aside. We're going to sort that out, but that's certainly the argument put. And so therefore there should be a selecting on the basis of cultural background or religious background then.
What's really intriguing to me about that the latest news of the Muslim mayor for New York, and people don't know how to respond when they want to complain about it, because either they say he's going to bring in, Sharia law, or they're like, he's a democratic socialist. So they're like, is he right or is he left?
It's going to be woke Sharia law.
Obviously, it can't be both. So, which just
Yes.
kind of just shows the assumptions that people bring to this kind of question. For instance, where has our Islamic migration come from? It's often come from countries in which those people would like to practice a more moderate form of their religion. They would like to be in a freer society.
No, I would say Iranian and immigration is a great case in point. I know I want to go get a bit theological here, because on one level we are relatively amateur,
Yes.
perhaps one more than the other. I'm pointing at myself when it comes to social analysis. There are experts who do that.
Yes.
And our expertise really is a theological approach, and that's a bit complicated because there's nothing particularly directly about immigration in the Bible. We don't have the perspective.
There is actually.
Well, there's a lot.
I'm going to disagree. There's a lot about immigration.
But from the perspective, not from the perspective we're trying to talk about, which is how does a nation state deal with immigration in the 21st century? We're trying to apply biblical principles into a different world, aren't we?
I mean, most of the stuff about immigrants is in the Old Testament, and they just don't have the technological sort of way to police their borders. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no way you could police your borders back in that time. So foreigners come in, then you've got to deal with them. So, obviously border control is absolutely not something that we see happening in the Bible in that sense. I mean, you do have some interesting play out of empires and what they do with people movements and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that's sort of one step removed. But however, I think we do get a lot theologically. It's really bound into the idea of what kind of nation Israel is how they will treat the foreigner. And it's really connected to their own experiences as foreigners in both Egypt and then in like Babylon or even Assyria. And so there's an expansiveness, and I think we had a really great conversation some seasons back with Mark Glanville about this. So go find out that episode. But there's an expansiveness to the concept of the nation in the Old Testament that's really instructive to Christians. Now, of course, that is a theocracy in a sense.
Yeah, you have
right?
to be pretty careful here because Israel is extremely not multicultural. Right? It's very much yes, come in, but you don't add your wonderful melting pot of cultural niceties to us, especially not your gods. So there's certainly
Israel.
Caveats. Yes.
Well, I don't know whether I would describe it that way. I don't think that there's no kind of forced mechanisms, is there, in terms of foreigners who come into Israel, but there is certainly a kind of attractional method of how they treat the foreigners within their nation, which would work to say our God is a preferable God. Now, from
go on. Keep moving forward to the New Testament. I think it's probably better.
But from the Jewish side, of course, there were certain religious commitments in terms of who they married and that kind of thing at different points. But that's a different thing from how they were treating foreigners coming in. I think.
Yes.
I think you need to be careful about that distinction.
Yep.
But you want to move on to the New Testament.
Well, I'm just nervous because you're dealing with narratives of conquest and invasion, and just yes, you could be selective. I think you've got the treatment of the alien within your gates. That there's the story of Ruth, the Moabitess, etc. You've got that, but you do have a kind of monoculture, which is not our 21st century situation, especially not in the New World. So, and we're not Israel. So,
interestingly,
how do we apply these principles? Yeah.
Really interesting about that because, of course, for instance, we all talk about Samaritans. It's like one of those words that's so significant that's come into our English language from the New Testament, right? Because we don't really understand what's sitting behind that. So, Samaria is precisely that kind of mixed culture. Absolutely. Now, that comes out, and as these things do, these things come out of complex, traumatic historical events. Like people migrate often due to trauma, right? That's, if I can think about it.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about more of the secret DNA of us. But what happened is Assyria takes over that part of the world, and they had a policy of trying to erase national identities. So they would move people out and then move people in. And so against their will almost, although, they did the wrong thing, hence why they're getting conquest. But you're getting a really mixed group in Samaria. And so the Jews have a lot of negative feelings towards Samaria, but in the New Testament, that is overturned.
Now, how is that a social policy, though, how does that apply to, I totally agree, right? But how does this apply to the social policy about immigration?
Well, I want to say two things here.
Yeah.
First thing is, let's not jump to social policy. And the reality is for most Christians who are going to be dealing with this, they are going to be dealing with more their day-to-day interaction with immigrants. But that actually leads on to what I want to say about social policy, which is to say that you can't separate social policy from the kind of community that you want to create. And I think if we want a community in which we feel like people are supported, in which we feel like there's not racism, in which people are given full dignity, all those kind of things, you actually can't have an immigration policy which distinguishes on the basis of things like race and religion. I think you can have an immigration policy that distinguishes on things like family reunion or refugee status or skilled migrants or those kind of things, which don't talk about, therefore, the inherent value of the human being. But I think once we start having a social conversation or once we start putting things like the White Australia policy, if we look back in history, then what you get in your culture is racism.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry, I've been trying to disagree with you all along, but I really strongly think this is the case. That is, you can't, liberalism echoes Christianity actually, and Christianity, we have to be race blind. And so our government echoes the kind of society the church is. It's not exactly the same, but I think whatever policy you have can't be selective on those bases. However, I do think you can say that we are inviting people to particular social vision and welcome them in. I think partly there's been a lack of hospitality, and that might be, we all bear some responsibility for that. But it's the act of hospitality which actually warms the society up, which actually potentially makes the immigration experience a much less hostile experience, preventing the ghettos that we do find threatening in the end. So I think the church has a lot to teach, to give our society by modelling that kind of internationalism, that kind of welcome, which is blind to race, for instance.
Well, I'm not sure I would use the word blind, but not preferential on race. Is that?
Yeah, not preferential on those. Now, I think we better close in there. There's lots and lots to talk about, and I hope we keep arguing about this on our Facebook page. But we're going to move on to another segment where we're going to talk to someone who's had first-hand experience of this.
Still to come, we talk with Jerry Jones-Sparks, a Tamil Indian Australian with a significant outreach ministry to South Asians. And then, the secret DNA of us. Be our guest, opening up the conversation to others. Jerry Jones-Sparks is with us today. She's the Ministry Director of the Good News series, an evangelistic video resource for South Asians. She also works part-time as a strategic consultant for the Satcher Network, a South Asian Christian network in Australia. Prior to that, she was outreach minister at St James Anglican Croydon in Sydney. And I believe in the last census in Croydon, 58% of people had both parents born overseas.
That's right. That's right.
Compared to the Australian figure of about 36.7. And Jerry herself was born overseas in India.
Yes.
So welcome back to the show, Jerry. This is actually you're one of the only people that we've had on twice.
I'm flattered.
The other person was Karen Swallow Prior. So you're in August company.
Yeah.
So last time Jerry was on, spoke about being Gen Z. Mm-hmm. But this time on, you've got a different hat on. So it's great to have you with us.
Lovely to be here. And on video.
And on video, I know. Yeah. I know. We've really gone up in the world.
Amazing.
And now, I actually have to put makeup on for this.
Yeah.
Well, I had it on it before anyway.
Yeah.
So, Jerry, tell us a bit about your personal background. When did you come to Australia? Why did your family come?
Yeah.
And where did you come from?
Yes, I was born in Chennai in South India. And I was 4 years old when my family migrated to Australia. I didn't fully know what was happening. I just remember my aunts and uncles in India whispering to me that I was going to foreign, which I thought was the name of this country I was going to. I thought I'm going to foreign. I'm going to foreign. I was so confused. I was like, what's Australia? But I loved my early experiences here in Sydney. I think a big part of that is because I grew up in the western suburbs, God's country, I believe thoroughly. Just had lots of cultures around, and very quickly our family was able to find some other South Asians who helped them actually, our whole family, on our journey to finding Jesus. And so that's a really important part of our story. And we felt like we had new family here. So that was special.
So that was special, but there must have been some lows as well as some highs in society general and in general, but also in the church, I imagine. So what have been the pluses and minuses of your experience?
Yeah, my personal experiences have been quite positive. I know that's not true for everyone. And I think talking to other migrant kids who've grown up in different times and different parts of Sydney, they have very different experiences to me. I grew up in a little Tamil home church until I was in late high school. And then I went to one of the most multicultural churches in Sydney. And so I've had the most positive experience, I think, a migrant can have. When I think about perhaps when my older brother or my family faced, there's a sense of that model minority myth, if you're familiar with that. It's the idea that we're skilled migrants and we're so grateful that we get to be in such a beautiful country with great resources, that you keep your head down and you don't complain. And so I think anything mildly negative that happened, Michael, was kind of not taken seriously or aired. So there's a very strong positive narrative around, our migration story. There was a lot of homesickness. I think that's the hardest bit, being away from a family in India who, if you're from an ethnic background, your cousins are like your siblings and your aunts and uncles are like, adjacent to parents. And so that's losing that sense of closeness coming here was definitely a downside. My parents came to Australia for lots of reasons, but mostly to to give us a great life.
Mm-hmm.
And my mum's a teacher, and she saw what it was like for kids to grow up in the education system in India and how just tough that was. They wanted us to have a great education. Yeah, loved public school here in Australia. So positive experiences.
Did your parents have English before they came, or did they have to learn?
Yeah, they did. They did have English, but it's not heart language. So there was a bit of an adjustment period. When my mum first went to teach at a school, it was more to do with culture shock than the lack of English.
Yes.
Teachers are highly, highly respected in India. You know, they walk into the room and you stand up and you do not open your mouth. And she was just shaken by, you know, her first experience in the classroom. And my dad completely retrained. He worked, you know, 2 or 3 jobs. He was just hustling that migrant dream. But yeah, the most incredible thing that happened for us is understanding who Jesus was and what grace meant, and that transforming our family.
So had your family, I believe it did come from historically a Christian background but wasn't practicing, is that right?
Well, they were practicing.
Right.
Very, very religious Roman Catholics.
Ah, okay.
And that story is different for everyone.
Yes.
But in my family story at least, they didn't know that you could really have a relationship with God or what it meant to be saved by grace or to have an assurance of salvation. So that was kind of mind-blowing. Yeah.
And so moving then you've got your personal story, but then you've obviously been observing the current debate about immigration in Australia. How have you personally experienced that conversation? In particular, Indian immigrants have been singled out by some commentators. They've said, we've got too many, Indian immigrants. That's been rising. Hinduism is the largest, apart from
the very small one coming off extremely low base.
Correct.
I think in the Northern Territory, there's like a really tiny minority religion. It's about 300 people in Australia or something.
That's growing
but there was
really fast.
0, right?
Yeah, that's a basket full of red herrings, right? But Hinduism is growing very fast, and certainly out in the western suburbs, there are suburbs where Indian immigrants are kind of very prominent.
Yeah.
So how have you personally experienced the this current debate?
It's been so fascinating, and I think it's revealed a lot of what perhaps was under the surface and undercurrents in our society, and the kind of commentary that we're seeing. You can kind of trace it back to some of the ideas that people might hold, the fear of the other or a lack of understanding or an Anglocentrism that has been kind of normal in our society for a long time. So you can trace some of those things. I haven't felt hurt in a particular sense because it hasn't surprised me because I can trace it, if that makes sense. I know some others who are South Asian, seeing the protests in particular was particularly confronting for some friends. It's made me kind of dig deep and ask, okay, what does this mean about where we're at as a nation? And what does that mean for the gospel? I'm not a migration expert, but what does it mean to be ministers of the gospel in this time and place?
Yeah, well, any reflections on that particular question? I mean, that's a great question to kind of lead on. So you've just basically asked the question. What does it mean to be a minister of the gospel and under those conditions with this particular tension rising?
Well, there's lots going on right now, as you know, lots of polarization and extremism in views of thinking. I think we're really in a kairos moment, and by that I mean a really special time and an opportune season. You can see the way that God has been factors in society at large have been developing and culminating under God's hand. And it seems like God is on the move in a new way. Social commentators are saying we're on the brink of potentially some kind of spiritual renewal. There's spiritual openness across our nation, particularly among young people. So that's the wider Christian story right now. And it's really interesting to me when we know that it's God who appoints where and when all people should live. If that's the time, who are the people that God has put around us? And so I see lots of opportunity. just see so much opportunity and this kind of just incredible cynicism and polarization. I think people are starting to get sick of it and a bit numb to it. So I think there's going to be some kind of shift in our normal of engaging with cultural commentary. I think it's pushing us back, especially with AI, to pushing us back into community and, just the people around us. I think it's making us even more apathetic as Australians to, socio-political stuff and just like, I just want to talk to the people around me and my friends and my neighbours. So there's a challenge and an invitation there to get to know the people around us and build relationships with the people that God is bringing near us. Yeah.
So talk to us about your 2 ministries, the paid ones anyway, at least. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that you're doing. But Satcha Network and also the video series that you're doing, like how are they sort of connecting with the current situation?
Yes. So Good News Series is an evangelism course for South Asians in heart language. And I've been working on this for, feels like my whole life, but 5 years. I'm really glad it's almost done. But the initial content was actually developed by my dad, who after finding the gospel became a mad evangelist and has just seen a lot of fruit from this. And so he handed it down to me to develop. That is responding to just the effectiveness of hearing and being engaged with the gospel in your own heart language and with cultural resonance. And so it's part of my heritage and exciting to me as someone who loves evangelism to develop that. I hope that comes into the hands of Christians who know South Asians, particularly Tamil speakers, with the first production, and, they can engage with that material. Interestingly, when I started doing that project, I was quite maybe a bit too idealistic about what it could be. I thought, okay, great, let's do them in all the South Asian languages. Right. We'll learn as we go.
That's a lot of languages, isn't it?
I know. I didn't think it would take this long. But I thought, let's do Hindi next. Let's do the biggest ones. But what I've realized actually in my work with Satya, talking to churches about their mission strategy and how to contextually reach South Asians is another emphasis that we have to consider here is how can all local churches be more intercultural, not just what is the place for, monocultural mission, which is important and has its place, but as a wider church, as we're becoming an increasingly multicultural nation, how do people from a non-Western background in particular find it easy to fit in, belong, and find Jesus in our Christian communities? And so it's got me thinking actually about an intercultural version of the course, and it's really shaping some of the strategy we're developing with Satya Network about how we want to grow as a movement.
So interesting.
Isn't it interculture? I mean, you'd say interculturality?
Yes.
Interculturalism is probably like it's so New Testament that it's not incidental to who the identity of the church,
right?
And something they have to deal with in the New Testament in order to spread the gospel, right?
Yeah.
So it seems to me like not just this isn't just a matter of pragmatism. Oh, we've got a multicultural society, so we need to be a multicultural church, but rather something of the essence of what you'd have to say. So this call for us to be intercultural is actually something close to who we are, don't you think?
That's right, and I think it's embedded into our ecclesiology that we reflect and reach our local communities. So perhaps if you're a church in Mosman, you're not worrying quite yet about reaching South Asians. You're reaching the people around you. But for most places, actually in most of Metro Australia, this is something we have to consider. How can we become more intercultural that's right. Like it's not just a pragmatism of, how can we reach those around us? But there's something gospel-hearted in how it shapes our gathering.
So we know from the New Testament that food is obviously an issue, like for intercultural gathering, right?
Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge for intercultural gathering in the Australian church right now? What makes it hard?
Oh, I think what makes it hard is that we've assumed the Anglo or Western way is neutral and normal. And I think it makes it really hard to reconsider how expression and methods of communication and a number of things that don't touch the heart of the gospel, but just how we express and contextualize it, it makes it really hard to reconsider that. It makes us actually have to identify what is Western culture, what is Anglo-Aussie culture, and what is the church culture in particular. Identifying and naming that, nothing integrally wrong with that, but what does it mean to also sit alongside other cultures if we're increasingly intercultural?
Have you got specific examples? I mean, I know in my situation I've got Chinese background people who expect the pastor to actually tell everyone what to do.
Yes.
And they're always coming to me and saying, why don't you just tell everyone what to do? And I have to say to them, in Anglo-Saxon culture, it's been interesting to reflect on this.
Yeah.
Particularly in Australian culture, leadership is very flat and you have to do it by convincing people, not by commanding them. And so,
although my experience having worked in a Chinese church is it's not as simple as you've just portrayed.
Go on, Megan.
no doubt.
Tell us.
Well, so for instance, I worked in a Chinese church, and of course there's the Chinese diaspora, and so people were coming in from different versions of Chinese culture, right? And they were having intercultural difficulties with them.
Right.
And then also there is it's just that the people what people think as opposed to what the pastor thinks is actually really important. It's just the way that you communicate about it is different, and the way that you use power is different. But it takes you a while to pick it up, immersed in the culture, to kind of go, actually, the pastor could say that thing, but that's going to be a lot of heartache, So. And there's things. I found things were indirect that would be direct in my experience, and things were direct that would have been indirect in my experience in Australian culture. So it's just way more complex than even some of those we get a little bit of understanding of a culture.
Yeah.
But the complexity even within that culture, and, the people that would come and talk to me about, Hong Kong people or Malaysian Chinese or whatever, that would go on. I suddenly had to learn this depth of it. And I'm sure, even in just a decade, I didn't understand all of it. But
well, to take your initial example, Michael, one thing we've done with a partner church as Satya is go alongside their senior minister and gather some of the key South Asians at church who they did have. And the senior minister was wanting for them to get more involved and step into some more leadership. But they were saying no because, there's lots of reasons, but high power difference, culture, the church back in India, even higher, like the sense of honor and reverence for a minister or priest is very high. But we did a workshop with them and we asked, okay, what cultural aspects are affecting your view on serving and engaging with the priesthood of all believers and Ephesians 4 and getting them to actually talk through their own assumed cultural position, because we all have that, and including migrants who come over, we don't come over all self-reflective and self-understanding necessarily ourselves. It takes a lot of thoughtfulness on every party to come to the table and take part in interculturalism.
So I think that's helpful because it's not just a sentimental view of what it means to be intercultural and multicultural as the church, which means it does take work. It takes hospitality. And it takes making space for each other and a bit of reflection on yourself, actually, a desire to work out what you can accommodate, what you don't have to hold on to.
Yes.
And so that does take, I just want to kind of point out that it takes work. And also then it'll probably it's worth our society recognising that in order to accommodate people from different backgrounds. It takes some work. We can't just let it happen.
And it's really messy.
It's messy.
There's going to be conflict, and it would be way simpler to just plough through with the way we've always done things.
So I interview new candidates as part of a team for the Baptist denomination, and we're getting a whole lot of new Nepali, which is actually another place of increasing immigration.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yep, so we're getting some new Nepali pastors and churches join us. And it was a fascinating conversation with a Nepali pastor that I had recently, where he was kind of talking about how he was affected by his training in the Philippines as well. And then when he came, already they're doing changes within their church, the Nepali church, which doesn't look like the Nepali culture itself. It's already come through like his training in the Philippines, his experiences in Australia, and he was talking about the changes he's already got. Like he's already doing a deeply reflective practice in his church planting as well.
Amazing.
Which was so helpful for us to hear because it helped us, I think, reflect on more what we're doing within our church, how we determine church culture. But just sort of brought up, it's not this as simple as I'm coming over and I'm just setting up how church is done in Nepal.
Yeah.
I'm coming over and intentionally rethinking it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And it's amazing what God is doing in the Nepali community. So much gospel growth there. And what's interesting about it, they also have Hindu background.
Yes.
But they've never been colonized. And so this huge barrier that I think is often in the way of reaching Indian Hindus, for example, is just not there. And so that's just an interesting reflection.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, interestingly, when I was talking to this guy, I don't have his permissions, I can't give his name, but it was even the way that he described his barrier of coming to faith was so different from what you would have in Australian Christian culture in terms of he found it hard to accept monotheism because he was in a culture in which polytheism was felt natural.
And actually a cultural value.
Yeah.
If you're a decent person, you're a syncretist. It's so connected. It means you will adjust with everyone around you. You're saying everyone's okay. It's a sign that you're a tolerant person. And so actually untangling that cultural value from that religious kind of perspective is really interesting.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jerry. It's great to see you again. She's twice visited us, so she wins wins some kind of there is no prize, I'm afraid.
I love a prize.
Just fame and fortune will be yours. It's great to have you with us. We really do wish you well in the new ministry ventures and all the extraordinary things that will bring. Thanks again for joining us.
And if people want you to come and speak at their church about some of these issues, you'd be really up for that?
We'd love to do that. You can find us at satyarnetwork.org.
Still to come, the secret DNA of us has a fascinating premise. Take 100 people from postcode in Australia, test their DNA and see what their ethnicity can tell us about their individual stories, but also about our story as a nation. That's next. Through the Wardrobe, Finding Truth Through Story. The Secret DNA of Us is a 2025 SBS TV series. It's a world first in which 4 Australian towns and neighbourhoods offered mass DNA tests, lots of spitting in bags in this show, to see what they reveal about the area's history, the individual stories of participants, and what ethnicities are hidden within their DNA. It's hosted by Mark Fennell, the journalist Ray Johnston, and the ancestry expert Brad Argent, who actually finds one of his own relatives in the story. So that's really good. Then the 4 places they visit and test are Barnsdale in Victoria, in the Gippsland area, Surrey Hills in New South Wales, Geelong in Victoria, and Bathurst in New South Wales.
I feel like SBS was, they didn't use up too much money with this because they didn't go to Western Australia.
No, they really didn't. So here's a clip from the trailer.
The extraordinary results reveal us and our nation as never seen before.
All of you have Mediterranean DNA. Yes! Indian ethnicity. African DNA.
I thought that I was French.
How does the story of each town or neighbourhood fit into the wider history of the nation?
You all have convict ancestry. It'll change how you see Australia. It'll change how you see yourself.
This is overwhelming.
It's wonderful.
I actually cried in every episode of this. I did not expect to be that moved as I was. I mean, obviously they're deliberately manipulating my emotions, but it's so much about relationship, community, what makes somebody, how they understand who they are, and what they get from the DNA, the stories that they pull out are so significant for individuals, for communities, I think for Australia as well. I just want them to go see more. I mean, what did you think?
Well, it's stories, isn't it? That's what's crucial is actually the DNA the DNA produces or allows them to tell different stories, general stories and significant individual stories, and that's what's so fascinating. So I think finding out that you have, one part Sarawakian or something is just, that what does that mean if you don't identify with that particular ethnicity? But finding out the story of what romance led, what interaction, what brought people from here to here. And often, being the kind of society we are in Australia, often those stories, as you said before, are traumatic, but they're also heroic. They're often tales of hardihood and of persistence and perseverance. The bringing out of German settlers to Geelong, for instance, to a place called Germantown, which has kind of been obscured because of the First World War. And they were, and what was it that they made? There was certainly a German bakery, but they were there for a particular industry, weren't they?
Yes,
you can't remember.
I can't remember.
We have to look it up.
They were, yes.
But, brought from so far from, to a place where their language wasn't spoken, that sort of thing. And then people discovering that they had connection to the Germans of Germantown.
I really liked the first episode of Bensdale because it just seems like when you first come in, it just seems like a classic Aussie rural town where the thing that they're really proud of is their meat pie, right?
Yes,
it's
the
just,
meat pie.
but even there, the diversity of ethnicity there was much more than the people themselves realised, and it really demonstrated the history of the area, which a lot of people didn't even know the history of the area. So, for instance, just intriguing in terms of even people's understanding of their British heritage.
Yeah, it was Scottish and English. They were much more than they thought.
They thought they were English. They didn't realise how Scottish they were. They were like almost all of them had
Scottish
heritage.
Ancestry, yeah.
But then also it was much more diverse in terms of not just British heritage in this what looks like classic, rural town Australia.
Yeah.
And also then displaying things like the camel drivers who came through on the trade route.
Yes, and there were Italians. Weren't there Italians in there as well? There was another ethnicity too that brought through, or Indians. Maybe I'm talking about the Indians that brought through. There's a camel, but there was also the Indian who were kind of the I was going to say junk sellers. They're kind of selling bits and bobs.
There was all sorts of, and even intriguing. I think there was in Bensdale. I don't want to go too much into spoilers, but there's an Aboriginal man.
Yes.
Who realised his ethnicity is more diverse than he thought. And that showed another bit of history as well.
Absolutely.
So it's fascinating, I think, that a lot of the stories we tell about ourselves currently as a nation don't necessarily reflect the full picture of what was going on even only like 50 years ago or something.
It's interesting though, I find, and I feel it myself, the impulse to find one's roots. That's a very 21st century thing. I mean, well, maybe not, but it seems in particular in the modern world where we're nuclear families, if at all, and so disconnected from previous generations, all of a sudden there's this prayer that technology will be able to connect us through back into the deep times of the past and tell us, interestingly, a question of identity. Tell me who I am. There's a lot of that sort of stuff. I now know who I am. This makes sense of my bad temper because I'm from this background. I'm Irish, and so this.
Yeah,
there's a little bit of myth making around.
There is
that.
a bit of myth making. I mean, look, people are having their first reactions on camera and that kind of thing. Some of what's really interesting about this is what it says about Australia and these towns, but some of it too is just intensely personal. Like there's adopted people who don't even know who their
that's extraordinary.
Who their parent is or something like that, and to find that out is feeling something about who they understand themselves to be and that kind of thing. It gives them something that other people have that they've never thought they would have. So it's really moving in that way. And I think perhaps then bringing a Christian lens in here, it really speaks to us, I think, about some of our deepest held values as Christians, about the importance of community and the importance of family, and how I think, for instance, migration is quite disruptive of that. And so how do we then give each other those back again in those experiences, or even adoption is sort of disruptive of that as well.
Yeah,
How do we give people family and community?
Some of those stories are hidden because of shame as well, because of, naughty things that happened or whatever it might be, or kind of things that were felt to be shameful. And that's certainly true in the Indigenous
it's
story.
true in my own. Like, I've looked at my own ancestry and I can tell
that's
you.
what I'm going to say as we wrap up. I was going to say, have you been spitting in bags lately?
Oh, I am about to for Christmas. So I bought myself and my twin. I won't say which brand, although it's the same brand as they used on Secret
That
DNA
could sponsor an
Advice.
episode. But yeah, go on. And you're about to find out.
I'm about to. So I will report back once I've
fantastic.
done it. Yeah.
Well, my father did it recently, so that gives me half the story. And we discovered, this was the surprise, we discovered that he is 5% West African, which means via Virginia, which means somebody's mum was owned by somebody's dad at some stage. So we know which branch. And so I just want to chase it back. It can only go out about 200 years, but what an extraordinary thing to discover. There's no visible evidence in us that would be the case. But there you go.
Well, thanks for being part of With All Due Respect. Coming up next episode, life is full of ethical dilemmas, but are we any good at dealing with them?
And where do we even begin? Our guest, Professor Brian Brock from the University of Aberdeen, has just published a huge book on this topic. He's going to help us out as we think through how we live ethically. So join us next time. Bye for now.
See you later.
With All Due Respect is hosted by Megan Powell Toit and by me, Michael Jensen. It's produced by the lovely Derek Yeo. The editing has been done by Alec Green and Graciela Artifiun. With All Due Respect is part of the Hope Media Network. We're delighted to say it's on Radio 103.2. So go to hope1032.com.au and click onto our Facebook page to join in the debates with All Due Respect.